In 1803, America paid France $15 million for the Louisiana Territory, in what was surely one of the best deals of all time. America instantly doubled in size, acquiring territories from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Canada, and from the Mississippi to the Rockies. As the French flag was replaced by stars and stripes, Americans cheered, while Louisiana's French colonists looked on glumly. They were thinking the same thing. What do we do now? The French had been in the Mississippi Basin since 1682, but the Louisiana Purchase signified the beginning of America's massive expansion to the west. But what happened to the French who were left in the U.S.? This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever felt like you're constantly running on a hamster wheel, trying to keep up with the demands of work and life? There was a time when I was juggling multiple projects, working long hours, and barely had time for anything else. I was constantly exhausted, stressed, and on the verge of burnout. It got to a point where I dreaded waking up in the morning, knowing that I had to face another day of endless tasks. My mental health was taking a serious hit. Reaching out to a therapist was one of the best decisions I ever made. Through therapy, I learned valuable strategies for managing my workload, setting boundaries, and prioritizing self-care. If you're struggling with work-related stress and burnout, know that you're not alone. And that's where BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that makes it easy and convenient to connect with a licensed therapist from the comfort of your own home. With BetterHelp, you can have therapy sessions via phone, video chat, or even messaging, depending on what works best for you and your schedule. They have a network of over 30,000 therapists, so you can find the right match for your needs and preferences. And if you feel like your therapist isn't a great fit, you can easily switch to someone new at no additional cost. Don't let work-related stress and burnout control your life. Take the first step towards a healthier, happier you by checking out BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/Nologia or select Nologia at sign up for a special discount off your first month of therapy. For many of them, it was home, and they had no intention of leaving. Some decided to try their luck elsewhere and moved somewhere else in the US or made their way up to Canada. Others sighed reluctantly and simply headed back to Europe. And although the French influence is still highly evident in the Mississippi Valley, the American takeover very much spells the end of France's official presence in the U.S. Louisiana was first discovered in 1682 by the French explorer René Robert Cavelier de la Salle near the mouth of the Mississippi River. He coins the name after King Louis XIV, and claims the land west of the Mississippi as Louisiana, a territory of France. Louisiana accounted for a massive area of land, which covered over 2 million square kilometers. It stretched all the way from the Great Lakes in the north down to the Gulf of Mexico, and from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west. Louisiana was under French rule from 1682 to 1762, and again from 1801 to 1803, when France finally sold it to the US. It wasn't the first time that France had offloaded Louisiana to someone. Spain was given Louisiana earlier and governed it for 4 decades. When the 7 Years' War broke out in 1756, several European powers fought over territories in the Americas. Britain and France became embroiled in a bitter conflict. Spain also had vested interests in the Americas and eventually came to France's aid. However, Britain's naval power proved too powerful, and France and Spain were left licking their wounds when the war came to a halt in 1763. It was to have a huge influence on the shape of America. In the aftermath, France and Spain were forced to cede huge chunks of their North American territories to Britain. For France, it was Quebec, and all land east of the Mississippi, and Spain had to let go of Florida, all to the British. To compensate the Spanish for losing Florida, France gave them Louisiana under the Treaty of Fontainebleau in 1762. France felt responsible for Spain after the Spanish had come to its aid. The deal was done secretly, as France didn't want Britain to know that it no longer controlled Louisiana. For the next 40-odd years, Louisiana was thus controlled by the Spanish. For the French colonists, it was the beginning of the end of life as they knew it in Louisiana. Most of the French in New Orleans and surrounding regions were less than thrilled to be governed by the Spanish. They were all still fiercely loyal to the French crown and its administration. The French in Louisiana had already established their own culture and way of life. French was the official language, which the Spanish were smart enough to maintain. However, Spain was loath to spend too much on the newly acquired territory or allocate more officers to administrate it. Aside from the constant discontent from the French settlers, it was just too large to govern effectively. America was particularly keen to get its hands on New Orleans. The New Orleans port was a crucial point for trade, with a third of U.S. produce going through the city. America demanded the right to use the port. Spain initially refused, but then relented. By the turn of the century, Spain was fast losing interest in Louisiana. It too was being drawn into the war with Britain, which was a drain on state revenue. In 1800, Spain ceded Louisiana back to the French under the Treaty of San Ildefonso. At first, the French colonists in the Mississippi Valley were over the moon, but their optimism soon soured as things were heating up again back in Europe. A rebellion in Saint-Domingue in Haiti had erupted, and France was facing another inevitable war with its arch-rival Britain. Wars cost money, and America was only too eager to get its hands on the Louisiana territory. Napoleon was fast losing interest in the American colonies, and when Thomas Jefferson sent delegates to Paris to negotiate a deal, he decided to sell. $15 million later, America got the port of New Orleans that it so desperately wanted, plus a massive expanse of land running all the way up to Canada. It was a steal. It also meant the French settlers in the Mississippi Valley no longer had the protection or support of the crown. They were left with several tough choices. They could stay in the U.S., effectively as new settlers. With the Louisiana sale, America was now looking at mass expansion to the west, which would undoubtedly bring ample opportunities. Some of the French were disillusioned. Heading west was certainly a viable option too, because for many, the Louisiana experience had been a tough one. A large portion of Louisiana's original French colonists had been more or less forced to go there. Much of the land surrounding the Mississippi Valley was difficult to cultivate, and it was hard to find volunteers for colonies. France ended up sending convicts or the truly desperate to work as laborers on Louisiana farms and plantations. These included thieves, military deserters, and orphans. The settlers were also given little support from back home, and many would have starved if not for the help of the local natives. The Native Americans were also crucial for the French to ply their trade in furs and deerskins, which were in big demand back in Europe. The French had to establish and maintain healthy relationships with the natives, which was often easier said than done. In 1729, French settlers cleared land for a tobacco plantation, which angered the local Natchez tribe. The land was sacred, and it sparked a violent response. Natchez warriors turned on the French colony and massacred 230 settlers, sparing most of the women and slaves. The French hit back with a full assault on the Natchez and neighboring tribes, which brought French and native relations to a new low. But even if it had been hard going in Louisiana, many French colonists were still optimistic about settling elsewhere in America, or even staying put. New Orleans was a port city, which meant it had the potential to become a major trading hub. Plenty of French decided to stick around and find work in the sugar and cotton industries that were set to boom. Another option was to head up to Quebec in Canada. Even though France had lost the province to England in the Seven-Year War, Quebec was still very much a French province. The official language was French, and many of the citizens were either French or of French descent. Yet another choice was to simply pack up and head back to France. For many of the French in the US, this was the least appealing option. France was still embroiled in war with Britain and had lost its clout around the world. The defeat in the 7 Years' War was a devastating loss to the French Empire. It lost almost all of its North American territories and trade interests in India, not to mention racking up an enormous expenses bill. America was clearly the place to be. It was a young nation and growing fast. Besides, the French settlers hadn't received much financial aid when France had a stake in the US, and most of them were used to getting by on their own. At the beginning of the 19th century, many French worked as traders in Upper Louisiana, near today's Missouri and St. Louis. After France withdrew from the United States, many French moved towards the city of St. Louis, which French settlers had helped establish. St. Louis acted as a trading hub because of its convenient location on the Mississippi River. With no government support coming for French farmers in the Mississippi Valley, many moved west, attracted by the city's growth and French culture. Just north of St. Louis, the French colonists had further set up numerous settlements along the upper Mississippi River, around today's Midwest. When the Louisiana Purchase spelled the end of the French reign in America, a lot of the French in this region chose to remain. They'd established lucrative trading operations, especially in fur, and saw no reason to leave. Many other French uprooted and headed for America's northeast. Settlers from Louisiana and Quebec had grown frustrated with attempts to farm their lands. Not only was there a lack of arable land, but they faced stiff competition from more productive regions. The American Northeast was growing rapidly. Industrialization and the jobs it provided were drawing more and more people into cities. There were plenty of American French amongst the droves of people headed for the Northeast cities. By far the biggest ethnic group who elected to stay in Louisiana were the Creole people. Although the name Creole had a racial connotation, it was used during the French rule to simply describe anyone born in the New World, as opposed to an immigrant. Creoles were any number of racial backgrounds, but the majority were francophones and had embraced the French characteristics that are still evident in much of Louisiana today. They also spoke Spanish and were integrated with French, native, slave, and Spanish culture. Creole people formed an important part of the society and culture of cities such as New Orleans and still do. The French legacy is still prevalent throughout modern-day America. Areas such as Louisiana, Mississippi, and Missouri are full of cities, towns, monuments, and streets named after French identities. New Orleans, in particular, has held on to many of its French roots. From the bustling French Square marketplace to the wild party that is Mardi Gras, the spirit of France is still very much alive in some parts of America.